Okay, recording has started, so let everyone know they're being recorded. Okay, so this one I'll publish it on Brightspace for the students who can't join. It's an interview. Let's see. All right. Yeah, so this week we're going to talk about Confucianism. Confucianism, as we discussed before, in the previous sessions, right? At that point in time in China, actually there are there are two native philosophies coming out from China, right? Which is last week we talked about Taoism. Yeah, this week we're going to talk about Confucianism, right? So these are the two of them. Then there is one that came from the West, which is Buddhism, right? So at if you think about China in antiquity, right? Because for the purpose of this module, we are looking at history. So for an extended period in China, actually these are the three main school of thoughts, three main philosophies, or maybe three main, even if you want to call it religion, right? We might call it religion, right? But I would prefer to call it philosophy, right? So um, native to China, Taoism and Confucianism, right? And imported from India or from the West, that would be Buddhism. So three main ones. Okay. So okay, just to add in some administrative bit lah. So for case study 2, submission is extended to next Monday. So 17:59, right? So some of the case study examples will include materials that are related to Confucianism. Yeah. So there is a slight change of plan because last week we said we're going to talk about ancient Greek and Roman um, history and theory, right? So I think to be fair to all those who are doing case study 2, right, we will be talking about Confucianism instead. Okay, so the same goes for these are general notes for the discussion questions and exercises. The participation question for this week will be thinking about order and society. Yeah, because you'll find that when we discuss Confucianism, right, ideas of order, how the individual is ordered, how the family is ordered, how the society is ordered, right? So order is a very important concept lah. So this week we're going to discuss what you understand by order. Okay, so one discussion questions, just participate on the Brightspace forum. All right, I publish it after the session itself. So content for sharing, Confucianism, history and theory. First, there'll be introduction. Then we take a look at an overview of Confucian ideas. Right, a lot of them actually still carries through, still practiced today. Right, so it's good and bad, pros and cons lah. Right, but depending on how much time we have, right, we might not go into that level of detail. Right, but you guys can think about it if you have experienced, or encountered some of these values and some of these ideas. So the key confusion is take ideas can be here, right? We categorize into humanity and ritual. Okay, so the human part and the rituals, which is the rules lah, the rules you carry out certain things in accordance to the place in society. Right. So once again, order is very important. Okay. Then we will see how it translates into architectural ideas, right, and how it affects the order and ritual in the courtyard house. So that is courtyard house, the 三合院 or 四合院, right? 四合 mean four, there are four sides to it. Um, it's it's very interesting because it's like a physical manifestation, of this Confucianist ideas. Okay, then we also look at feng shui and the courtyard house, right? So not necessarily very associated with Confucianist ideas, the idea of feng shui, because you will notice there's some overlaps with Taoist concepts, right? Which we talked about last week, which we will talk about the natural world, the cosmic ideas and stuff like that, right? So because Confucianism and Taoism both are native to China, so there are bound to be some overlaps. Okay. So for discussion question this week, all right, um think about how order, right, is maintained in your society, okay, and how this order is manifested in the architecture that you see. Okay, so quite interesting because I think for students, we come from very diverse backgrounds. There's we have the native Chinese students, and then we have students from other races. So when it's a very different perspective and a very different look at it. So quite interesting as well. It's always interesting to have very like multiple viewpoints, right? So when you do the discussion questions, right, the very nice thing to do is actually to revisit, right? You think about your input, right? Then you give your best shot at the interpretation, right? Then you come back to it and you look at what your peers have said, right? It's always very interesting and very illuminating. Yep. And you think about also how the order is manifested in the architecture that you see. So two parts to it. Okay, introduction, ancient China. So carrying through right from last week, you realize that actually architecture, art, poetry, writing, right? Those are all kind of integrated, right? There's no very clear boundary that we are probably quite used to in the Western school of thought, right? So everything is like you might feel like a bit messy, and that there are no clear boundaries, right? There were no architects, and there was no specialists writing about architecture. Yeah, so nothing was separated into the we call it silos lah, silos, or in this case we can call it boxes. Right nowadays we like to we like to categorize things, right? There is architecture and there's engineering, and there is art and that is design, so on and so forth. But um, if you rewind right back in those days, to write about architecture is also to write about religion. It's also to write about philosophy. Yeah, it's also to write about culture, about history, and so on and so forth. So if assuming that we live during those times, right? To design a piece of architecture, it's kind of similar to maybe participating in the tea culture, and then you write a poetry or a prose as part of experience, right? So and the prerequisite, right, to all these creative acts is the knowledge of knowing how to live, right? So yeah, so the person, the human, must first learn how to live. Okay, and from there on, right, how to live with nature, right? That is what we discussed like last week. And then how to live within a human society, human civilization, right? So the concept is that actually if you don't even know how to live, right, you don't even know how to live well, you don't even know how to live in an orderly manner, then you should not be building, you should not be designing things, right? It's very step by step approach lah, and rightfully so. Yeah, so the how to live. So in the Confucianist thought, right? Um, to live well, you must first understand how things really are. Must understand how the world is ordered, right? Before you can even try to make order, right? So let me see whether we can. There is a contemporary context to this approach. Never mind. I think we leave it first. Okay, so the world is constantly changing in a flux, right? In a continual process. Okay, so remember last week we were saying we were saying that at its extremities it will reverse course, right? Um, which is the essence of the yin yang diagram, right? When you push things to the extreme, or when things develop to that particular extreme, it will change course and reverse course. Okay, so in this there is this chaotic flux of things, right? You need a kind of a guide, right? So that's why for Confucianist thought, order is very important. Okay, so it is basically an ethical and philosophical system, right? Focusing on the cultivation of a civilized individual to create a civilized society and then to create peace and order. Okay, so okay, what it means is it, once again it's very step by step. So first you learn how to be a civilized individual. That means one person, right? So it might take it might because all of us are very different, right? So it might take a longer time for one individual compared to the other, right? But the key thing is that if you are not able to like civilize yourself, you are not able to order yourself, then you don't move on to the next I call it circle lah, or the next step. So if you think of it in terms of circle, right? Um, like you are because you are the center, you're the individual, right? Then what is and if you draw another circle that's larger than you, right? What are the first things that you will touch or you will include? You're probably gonna think about parents, right? Maybe siblings, grandparents, right? So these are the maybe the family, right? So in today's context, maybe a bit of friends coming into the picture, right? But back then, this the next layer of the circle, right, is family, right? So after ordering the individual, you order the family. Okay, so it's only after ordering the family then you draw another circle and you start to order society. Right, so it's built up like one piece at a time. So because if you mess up yourself and you try to go to the next circle, right, to be a family, what are the probability that the family itself is ordered? The the probability, okay, there is a probability that you will succeed, right? It can be ordered, but actually it's quite low, right? But compared to if you take it on a step-by-step approach. So similarly, if you mess up the family, right, the family is disordered, and then you try to step up and try to order society, right? So if you can't even get the house in order, right? How do you try to what do you know? You don't even know enough of order. You don't even know enough of balance in order to try to implement it on a bigger scale. Oh, so like this is um, I think this is kind of why uh, when society is developed in this way, right? There's a certain robustness. There's a certain resilience to it. Yeah, and it's kind of organic compared to a top-down kind of approach. Okay, so the founder is Kongzi. So yep, where he lived during the Zhou dynasty lah. So that was the peak of governance and order. So Confucianist style, Confucianist way is the effortless process of human society functioning according to its natural ritualistic structure, right? So human society, you might say that it's contrived because it's like ritual based, but this ritual, right, develops in an organic manner actually and a logical manner. So the ritual structure is also cosmological. It is the order of heaven. Yeah, here we call it Tian, right? So once again, there is a link back to cosmology, right? This it is by observing, okay, this is what heaven, this is the ideal order of heaven, right? So I'm gonna recreate it in a microcosmos on Earth within human society. Right. So here you see a bit of similarity to what we have seen previously. Okay. So can I just share a bit more? This it's a step-by-step approach. So um actually Singapore, right? If you think about Singapore, you can say that it is a secular country. Um, but in the actually, if you try to think back, right, maybe it's harder for you to think back because you guys are relatively young. Yeah, but if you think about LKY days, right, the starting point of LKY's premiership, right, it is very influenced by Confucianist thoughts and philosophy, right? Especially in the way that he set out rules for um, the members of his office, right? Because he back then, I mean, this is what I heard. It's like there is a remember it's a step-by-step approach, right? So step-by-step, individual, family, and then society. So um, different scope, different responsibilities are also given to the individual based on where they are, right? Within that system, that Confucianist system of moral, social, political philosophy, and thoughts. Yep. So that's why we saw. I mean, personally, lah, I think that's one of the reasons why we are able to be such a resilient society. Mm. Okay, sorry I spent so long on this slide. Next slide. Okay, key Confucianist teachings, right? You can reference it from the Analects, right? Chinese we call it 论语, right? So it focuses on the cultivation of humanity. We call it 人, the humanness, and the cultivation of 人 and how to govern the self in society involving ritual and piety. Okay, so both ritual and piety, um, Li and Xiao, right? Li is ritual, Xiao is piety. Okay, both of them teach us how to behave appropriately in society in order to ensure order in societies. So a well-ordered society starts with the individual's cultivation of the value system and the virtue within oneself. Okay, so two parts to it. So the party is talks about like the relationship between people. Like for example, you yourself. Um, for example, okay, I don't think we're going to talk about that later. So I just share a bit lah. So for example, when we talk about filial piety, right? Actually, the starting point and in the discussion, it talks about your body, yeah, the human body, like um where does it come from, who does it belong to, so on and so forth, right? Because okay, for example, okay, if one day you want to get a tattoo, all right, say okay, I want a tattoo because I want to make this mark of something that's so important to me on my physical body, right? So that is a desire. Do you need to seek permission? That's okay. This is a modern way of think. Our modern way of thinking. So do you need to seek permission? Do you need to ask your own body? Like, okay, can I make this mark? It's like okay, semi-permanent, almost permanent mark, right? Based on what I like, right? Do you have to ask your own body? And do you have to ask someone else? Yeah, yeah, that's a question to ponder. So actually, if you think about it, right, like who gave you the physical body? Based on the Confucianist teaching, right, it's actually the parents. Okay, so understand as like teenagers or usually we are very rebellious, right? So that's where the times where might be the time where you decide to get a tattoo and so on and so forth, and you think that it's like individualism, I can do anything. But if you subscribe to Confucianist teaching, right, the starting point of piety is actually recognizing that actually the body is given by the grace of the grace and the sacrifice of the parents, right? Because they gave the flesh and then they gave also that that okay, there's no direct translation, but you can call it maybe the soul or the spirit, right? So the mother contributes one part and the father contributes one part, right? So if you think in terms of that, right, then there's a certain gravity to the decisions that you make, right? Any piercing or any tattoo, right? And to take it to the extreme, right? Maybe in like self-harm even, right? Actually, the body doesn't belong to you completely, right? There is a need to um, to seek permission actually, and there's a need to respect it, right? There's a need to give it much more respect than we are probably used to. Okay, and then the ritual part, the Li part, right? Is basically how to behave, lor. Yeah, what is the order and how to behave. So, for example, if we are to worship like ancestors, how do we go about doing that? Yeah, because back to the party, so if your body is given to by your parents, right, then your parents' body is also given by the grandparents, right? So there's a certain lineage. That's why actually the Chinese society, if you observe, right, is the only one that worships the ancestors. Yeah, like maybe in Western civilization, you probably pay respects to, or you remember them. But the Chinese society, under the Confucianist influence, right, is the only one that really worships the ancestors, recognizing this lineage. All right. So in Chinese, we call it the principle of 饮水思源, right? So because we are here in this world, right, we have this physical body to exist, right? Is due to our parents, grandparents, great grandparents, and so on and so forth. So the lineage is, you can trace it back thousands of years. Okay, so both of them, when they come to ritual and party comes together, right, it teaches you how to behave appropriately in society, okay, to ensure order. Okay, let's see what else I can add. I think kind of good. Okay, next slide. Okay, so humanity. 人 is achieved by education, is achieved by practice. Okay, and the knowledge learned from tradition applied to the present, living a life that's worthy of emulation. Okay, so um, in the it's kind of similar to, not sure whether you're familiar with the words of Steve Jobs, right? It's like you live in the present, and then you live in the present, and then you have to keep moving forward, right? And you don't really keep looking back. You only look back probably at the end, or at the end 10, 20 years down the road, right? You're going to take a break, take a breather, and then you look back, right? You realize, wow, so much has been achieved, So humanity is about how to live in the present, right? And how to live in a worthy manner, right? Such that if you have, okay, this is also quite uniquely Chinese. So the Chinese traditional thought, right? You judge a person when they die. Yeah, you don't judge the person when they live, right? It's only when at the end of the person's life, right? Then you judge whether this person's life is worthy of emulation, whether this person is worthy of being an example, lah, right? So you don't judge it like just because a person is a genius, or a person has made a lot of money when there's in the 20s or in the 30s, or this person has invented this thing, right? So they don't do it back then. They allow the entire life of the person to kind of unfold, right? So only at the end, right, then they see what to learn and what not to learn. Okay, so Ren is empathetic. The individual realizes himself, herself within society and not distinct from it. Okay, so he's devoted to society, and it involves making the people around you better. All right, so rituals, which is Li, is to put into practice Ren. Okay, so ritual puts in an external form to the concept of Ren, because we have you are driven. If you have the ren, right, the humanity within you, you are driven in that manner, right? So the actions that you take, right, will become the rituals. So humanness is selflessness in thought and action for the well-being of others, right, as shown in the rituals. And filial piety, right, is the type of ren that considers the good of others, your elders, right, above yourself. So in keeping to this rules, right? Can we call rules, or keeping to this order? You know how rituals, piety, humanity comes together. It ensures the of the order and the proper functioning of the human society. So how does a Confucianist student learn and practice humanity, right? Actually, in is in many of the things that they do on a daily basis, even in the leisure, like reciting poetry, playing music. Yeah, because playing music, you need a certain calmness, right? Um, Maybe chess, painting, calligraphy. Right, all these are opportunities for the student to practice humanity. Okay, so next up, so a person with Ren, right, is able to endure hardships and enjoy happy circumstances, right? Because a there is a certain anchor to the person's life. Okay, so with this anchor, right, with this direction, the direction doesn't change when the circumstances change, right? Whether it's happy or it's hard, peacetime, wartime, but the direction is the same. It also allows the person to identify without prejudice and with accuracy the individuals who are, in a sense, truly good and evil, right? So you notice that there is a sense of judgment here already. What is good and what is evil, right? So uh, it is worth some effort, right, to think about this statement in relation to Taoism, right? So Taoism is like, remember we were talking that when you are specifying something is good, at the same time you're defining evil, or rather the bad, right? Kind, evil, so on and so forth, right? So there's a um, two ends of the spectrum. Okay, Ren also allows the human to be free from desire to do wrong, right, and to stand out from those who go astray. Okay, so the Confucianist thought is that if you see someone who is worthy, right, you seek to emulate the person. So good example follow. So if you see, the converse is true. If you see an unworthy person, what do? You don't emulate, right? You use that as an example, right, to examine yourself, just to like a checklist. Okay, I don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Whereas on the other hand, if that one is a worthy man, right, I will learn to do this, do this, do this, check, check, check. So these kind of two ways of thinking coming together will improve the person, right? So it's always kind of in relation to others. Okay, so the Confucianist thought is that actually virtue is not solitary. So it's always about the individual's relationship with the neighbors, with family. Okay, so it's beautiful to live amidst humanity, right? So to um here you see a bit of departure from Taoist thoughts, or maybe a bit of contention, maybe the word to use. To choose a dwelling place as destitute of humanity is hardly wise, right? This is their belief. Okay, so arguably, um, okay, this point is debatable, but you see the point is that you can start to see that there are places where Taoism and Confucianism is kind of opposing, right? One goes into nature, live within nature, and one seeks to place the human being within the human society itself. Okay. So in Confucianism, there are four life passages, right? Remember, step by step. There are three dimensions of the human conditions, right? And there are five key relationships. Okay. Let's check out the first one. Okay, Lee, Rachel, we talk about it. It's a common language. It creates a harmonious home and social life, right? We have four life passages, which is birth, maturity, marriage, and death, right? So these were first written down in the Han Dynasty. So you can see it's a step-by-step approach. It's like life is broken up into stages. Okay, so um let me see. Uh, yeah, four stages. So ritual is very important in society because it's like kind of like a framework. Yeah, because I think nowadays we are kind of used to like individuality. Like I will express this. I'm going to express myself. I think that is right. That is wrong, right? But let's say if if the two-person have a completely different idea of how certain things has to be carried out, right? Of course, you can allow them to carry them out in different ways, lah. But what if there's a need to judge what is the more orderly, more harmonious way, right? So back then, you can take reference to the rituals, right? So like this, the way of doing this is closer to the ritual, right? The way of doing that further away from the ritual, right? So the safest benchmark is to follow ritual. Okay, so for life passages, right? Birth, maturity, marriage, and death. So there are also rituals in relation to this, right? For example, during birth, there is a certain, let's say, there's confinement, there's special diet that's required, right? So it's looking at the child and the parent, the relationship between them, and because of their one is the child is a newborn being, so still very fragile, right? And then on the other hand, you have the mother who sacrifice blood to create the child, right? So the body is weak. So how do you take care of that? You how do you come up with a diet, that allows the body to recover in possibly a better state than before? Okay, then the next stage is maturity. Of course, I guess I guess we can say that probably you guys as students, right? It's like within this passage, because for sure you're no longer a kid, right? No longer a kid. You're kind of at the end of the teenager phase. So the teenager phase is really thinking about, you try to think back about the things that goes through in your head, right? The things that matters to you, the things that you think about, right? Think about yourself, then you think about your family, you think about your friends, there's so many things that you are trying to make sense of, right? So it's okay to be it's okay to not know what to do, right? That's why maturity is a long process, right? Even like for me, I'm still learning and I'm still learning and then trying to see how to refine and how to fine tune, So it's a continual process. Yeah. So going back to Confucianism, there is certain rituals, right, to mark the transition of that person into that maturity phase. Yeah, so it's always marked by certain actions and certain rituals to take, right? Similarly for marriage, marriage is very important because it's like it's very important because it marks the individual. Okay, it's kind of like certifying, right, that the individual is like it's an ordered individual. Like okay, this individual knows how to carry himself or carry herself. So now let's try to take the next step and build a marriage, build a family. Yeah, so it's a big step to take, But in the first place, is also kind of like certifying. Like you go to secondary school, right? You go to primary school, then you take the PSLE, then you clear it, and only after clearing it, then you go to secondary school, like the next stage. Yeah, so it's something. Okay, it's much more important than that, lah. Just trying to give a real world example to illustrate it. Yep. Then death also quite important because a lot of we talk more about marriage. Yeah. Yeah. So marriage is serious business. So there are actually like 6 stages based on the Confucianist ritual. You have the proposal, right? You have the engagement. You have the dowry. You have the procession, the marriage and receptions, and the morning after the wedding, right? Which usually the spouse will kind of will cook something for the in-laws, right? As a mark of showing respect, lah. You might think that's very old-fashioned, but it was there for a good reason. Yeah. Uh, um. Okay, I think this ritual, if you're interested, you can read up on your own, right? Because the first part we're going to talk about the principles, then we try to relate to architecture. Okay, so for death itself, very important. Uh, there's mourning, there is the incense, offerings, the procedures, placing of the food, objects, houses, either in the coffins or as part of the funeral procession, right? So it is also calls upon, those friends and relatives to come, right, to send off the deceased, right? And also in a sense, right, during that process, they also kind of evaluate the life of that deceased. Yeah, there'll be some certain judgment made lah. Maybe they don't say it out, they don't articulate it, but definitely when you're sitting there, you kind of run through your acquaintance with the deceased, right? And you kind of think about the life that he or she has led, right? And whether it's a good example of of a life that's well lived. Okay. Yeah, so we move on. So 3 dimensions of human condition. There's a self, there's a community, and there's also tradition. Okay, so firstly, to cultivate the self, individual must maintain, a mind and a heart that's alert. All right, you must also maintain a pure soul and brilliant spirit. Okay, so it's up to the individual to reflect upon themselves and cultivate themselves. So you notice the Chinese, they burn incense, right? Yeah, I'm not sure whether I've said this, but actually incense has okay, a lot of times, right, when we see people burning incense in today's context, you would think that is superstitions, right? So actually back then it's practical in two sense. The first one, right, you realize that, or rather I realized that actually incense, right, there is this antiseptic property. It's an antiseptic property because of the material being used. Oh, so when you burn it, right, and you notice it takes very slow to burn, right? It burns at least an hour lah. I think an hour or so. So the hour, right, the fragrance will kind of flow all around the space and cleanse it on. Yeah, because the material that they use to make the incense has antiseptic quality. So it's like spraying Dettol all over lah. Yeah, I learned about this actually during COVID period. Yeah, when I was researching the natural kind of antiseptic devices that is out there, right? So that's one thing. So if you are in that space and you inhale the incense smoke, so it cleanses like everything lah, the space, the surfaces, and then the individual. So that's the first part of it. Then the second part, right, is it marks the time for self-examination. Yeah, so I was saying, let's say the incense stick very slow to burn, right? It burns for X minutes or X minutes. So at the end of the day, right, that person, the individual is supposed to sit down, burn an incense, and do self-reflection. What have I done right? What have I done wrong? Right? So, and for example, if the person closes his or her eyes, do self-examination, and then open the eye, the incense is only halfway burned. Right? So what happens then? What does it mean? Yeah, it means that you continue self-examination. You might come up, stretch yourself, but you continue the self-examination until the incense finish burning, right? That is to ensure, right, you go to sufficient depth when you're doing the self-reflection, and then you do it on a daily basis. Interesting. So within the community itself, right, the individual must realize that community is necessary for this self-transformation to occur, and the living within the community broadens and deepens the self, and then there must be an integration of all segments of the world, right? For the belief is that a soul must be rooted within society, right? And the individual relies on society to become a full human being, right? And the society relies on them too. Okay, so there's a two-way relationship between the two. Right, because within the community itself, it contains examples you can emulate. It also contains examples that you learn to prevent yourself from doing, right? Thereby you become fully human in a sense, right? So the society also depends on you being a cultivated individual, harmonious individual, right? And from that as a basic building block, right? The society then becomes ordered or disordered accordingly. Okay, so the third point is traditions. So a person must maintain harmony and consensus in order to maintain peace and social order. So certain things must be done in a certain way because it's believed that this is the way of heaven, right? That's why you value your ancestors, you worship ancestors, and there are rituals to worship the sky and the earth, right? To seek guidance on how to behave. Okay, so for under ritual, the consideration for others is virtuous and is essential for the soul to flourish and to maintain good government and social order. So there are five basic relationships um, within filial piety, right? Five of them between father and son, father and son, ruler and minister, husband and wife, old and young, friend and friend, right? So this is a bit okay. When you read it the first time, right, it might feel a bit sexist, lah. Like women are to obey and serve parents, husband's parents, and to produce a male heir, right? All okay. Let's run through the points first. So all relationships are governed by ritual. This maintain and nourish order as well as cultivate Ren internally. So the motivation of the heart has to be aligned with the actions. It's not good enough to behave in a filial manner. One must be filial, right? So the deeds are an overflow of the thoughts of the mind. Okay, so there are actually two parts to it. In Chinese we call it 修行, right? So cultivation is two steps to it. First, you must know what is right and what is wrong, right? That's why we read a lot, you consult the teachers, right? Then on the other hand, it means nothing if you don't practice it. Yeah, you need to put it into action and practice it, and then you reflect on it. So that there are two parts to that equation. Okay, so okay, let's rewind a bit. I was talking about being sexist, right? But you must understand the context of the society back then. Yeah, so uh, um, because if you read the Confucianist text, right, you realize that actually um the women are not given very high status, or rather the status is rather suppressed, right? And it's just because of the functioning of the society, then the structure of the society, where most of the time the person going out to work, right, is the male, right? So when you go out to work, right, you are okay. This has relationship to the house, right? The Confucianist house. So the male being out to work, right, he's exposed to more ideas. He's exposed to more things on a day-to-day basis. But the weaker part is that maybe the relationship to the family, to the other members of the family might be sacrificed as a result. So on the other hand, right, you have the lady who is at home, right? So and this lady, right, her place is within the four walls, it's limited by the four walls of the house. Okay, so naturally, right, the the worldview is not as broad, all right, and the knowledge of how human society functions is kind of limited within that microcosmos of the house. Okay, but the pros and cons are once again. So the pros is that the relationship that the lady has, the wife has with the family, right, will be much deeper. Okay, so there is more engagement. That's why it's a nurturing spirit, right, and the order of the house itself. Whereas the husband will be outside, um, trying to either make a living, making relationships, furthering one's career, and so on and so forth. Right. So there is also a duality between the what's on the outside and what's within the house itself. Right. So You have to consider it in the context of the kind of society back then, right? Because it's very different from what we are used to nowadays. Yeah, like dual income dual income. Then because of dual income, the relationship between male and female, husband and wife, it will require rethinking, right? So if you're gonna take this Confucianist relationship, the way to think about it, right, and then you throw it to our modern context, you will think that it's like, oh, it's so passe, right? So you will realize its value if you think in terms of the context and the functioning of society, because that is a starting point whereby you can then use what you learn and transpose itself to our current context and see how to modify it actually. Okay, so that part we won't go into, we won't talk about that, but it's very interesting to think about. Yeah, so let's see. Okay, Li is observing the rights as a form of learning and self-discipline, and it changes, it adjusts one's inner being. So the rituals are not superficial; they are acts of the heart, cultivated by discipline. And rights are morally appropriate or the right things to do, regardless of regime change, of government and dynasty. All right. Of course, if it's a regime change with for another culture, then it's another matter altogether, right? Which we have seen in ancient China, right, with the Mongols taking over, and we have also had the Manchus taking over, right? So on and so forth. So this is the order from which architecture develops, the order of ritual, the cultivation of the ren. Yeah. So in the interest of time, you can read the story in your own time. Okay, I shall not elaborate. Okay, I think we will take a break. Let's take a 10 minutes break. We will come back, resume at 10:15. All right. Then we will see how these ideas are translated into architecture. Okay, so 10 minutes break. Resume at 10:15. Yeah, in the meantime, if you have any questions, just maybe write it in the chat. Then we can see whether we can address it. Okay. Okay, we'll continue the sharing. So, application of architecture, the key ideas are the virtue and order. All right. So architecture reflects the virtue of the occupants actually, and that's why there's this kind of physical showcase of the how virtuous the individual is. Okay, and also manifests the order, the way or the order of heavens, and how it helps to maintain it. Okay, so in the okay, how virtue is being visualized is seen in the attitudes towards the dwellings and towards material possessions in general. All right, so if you have a beautiful house but you neglect the required rituals, right? This is actually not it's not acceptable. Yeah. So likewise, seeking wealth, fame, or status for its own sake is not seen as acceptable, and it should not be a motivating factor for doing good in society or even performing the rituals correctly. Right. So, on one hand, you have the wealth to accumulate those beautiful things, right? Then on the other hand, you must show that you are able to observe the right rituals. Okay, so the order here is the order of heaven or the way of heaven, right? This is once again maintained by rituals, observing the correct practices in all the key relationships within the house itself, and beyond the house. Okay, so the structure is reinforced by architecture as architecture reflects the order of heaven and helps to maintain it. Ensuring this happens on the level of the individual house, the individual dwelling, is the responsibility of the head of the family, right? Similarly, if you think in terms of the larger community, then is the head of the community, and if you think in terms of the country, you know, is the ruler of the country. So overall, it is the order of heaven. So the Confucius says that who would leave a house without using the door? Why do people seek to walk outside the way? So for what it means is that walking outside the way is impossible, and to attempt to do so is kind of ridiculous, right? As this is the order of heaven, right, above everything else. So you should subscribe to this order and observe this order and stay within this order, right? So this has a certain physical manifestation in the architecture itself, right? The way that the dwelling is laid out. So later you'll see the diagram itself, right? It's pretty homogeneous. There are some flexibility within that system, within that structure itself, right, for the individual family. But at the same time, it is within a larger order. Okay, so concept of dwelling in architecture, right? So the master said Zhang Shuchen built a house for his tortoise with pillars in the shape of mountains and rafters decorated with duckweed as he lost his mind, right? So this is recorded in the Analects. So virtue is cultivated within society in considering our neighbors, right? So virtue is not being ostentatious, it's being modest, and riches that you have accumulated. These are for the sharing with the less fortunate and giving respect to for the less fortunate and giving respect to superiors. So if you are rich, right? If you're okay, if your family is rich, right, and the family focuses on decorating the house well, showing off lah, in the way that the house is decorated and kept up to date, right? It is not in terms of standing within the lenses of Confucian is within the society, right? If the society is like well trained in or well cultivated in Confucian's value, they don't see this as something that's very admirable, right? It's not seen as something that's worth emulating, right? On the other hand, if you are poor, right? If you're a poor family, the family need not be ashamed, right? If they set their heart on the way, right? set their heart in the way of respecting the position within the order of heaven, and they seek to cultivate themselves, right? On the other hand, right, people might see them because of the process of cultivation as an example to be emulated. Okay, so this is how actually physical manifestation, right, physical architecture can be a reinforcement of the Confucianist thoughts and teachings. Okay, so the dwelling, one is ostentatious. On the other hand, right, if they know that this rich family has accumulated riches, but the riches is used to better the lives of the surroundings instead of um, making that house itself, the place of dwelling, very well decorated or very large, very extensive, right? So if they're able to spread the riches, then that will be an example that is worthy of emulation. Oops, sorry. Okay, so let's see. Yep. So the master also believe, right, that the prerequisite to that is that, okay, what Confucius say? The gentleman will eat without stuffing his belly, right? He chooses a dwelling without demanding comfort, is diligent in his office and prudent in his speech, seeks the company of the virtuous in order to straighten his ways, right? So of such a man, one may say he is fond of learning. So this is actually a good example. Like, um, if if you think about it, right, in the context of the society we have today, it might feel a bit alien. Yeah, like you a lot of times, right, in order to show off riches, like maybe people go to restaurants and then they will order more than enough, right? More than what they can eat, right? And if you're able to finish everything, right, actually it's like not that respectful to the host. Something has to be left over. So like if you think about that in terms of the Confucianist ideas, right, it's kind of warped, right? Because the starting point should be your own in your own body, right? So your belly is only that big, right? And you need not feel 100% of it. You feel like 70% of it is actually sufficient for you to continue with your work, right? So if you have more than enough money, right, you can buy more food, then rightfully you should take care of those who are still hungry, right? Then everybody has the strength to do their work, to build a harmonious society, right? So that's the way lah, that they are trying to advocate. Okay, so the built version of the Li, right, is the house, the dwelling unit. House is ordered as society is ordered, placing emphasis on relationships between individual, society, family, and the order of heaven. So maintaining the order of the family is also maintaining the order of the society, and maintaining order of society is maintaining the order of heaven. Right. So if you think about that as one, the dwelling unit, right, is one family unit, and it grows, right, organically, and it's linked up by streets. So you know that the city, right, is a complex of courtyard houses, right, just like very flat, right? So we might think of the traditional Beijing Chinese house as a built version of the rituals which govern society, and it's also very interesting to look at it because they were built in that context, right? So if you look at the meaning of these houses in from today's context, it's very interesting to consider how the values have changed. Okay, so the house was ordered in the same way that the society is ordered. So now we look at it with different emphases, very, very different emphasis from what was. Okay, so that illustrates the value system of the society, actually. So the order of the house plays relationships on the emphasis on relationships between the individual and society, as well as between the individual and the family, so as to maintain the broader order of nature of heaven. Okay, so the order of the house on axis reflects a wider version of the order of society, but it's also essential for the order of society. The failure to maintain the family, the failure to cultivate virtue via tradition and ritual, like the failure to cultivate the individual, would result in social chaos. right? So the courtyard house is a unit of society as a whole, right? Not just socially, but also in terms of physical scale, material, so on and so forth, right? So the city is made up of a complex of smaller courtyards and smaller societies, right? So it's each of it, right, is overseen by the individual responsible, by the country itself, right? The city itself, the country itself, by the emperor, right? Then within the district itself, maybe a magistrate. Then within each individual house itself, the head of family. Okay, so this is an example, labeling the spaces. You can, if you're interested, you can do it in your own time because we're doing case studies, so we'll see examples as well. All right, so it's a 四合院. So this is actually 2 times lah. Right, so that the first one you see an upper square and a lower square. The entrance is at the lower right hand corner. Right, so you can see that there's a hierarchy and a progression, right? So if you think about it in terms of like, where the entrance is, you know that the street is like next to the main door, right? So the entrance is thrown to one side, right? Move to one side. It's not, they don't enter the house like in the middle, right? For what purpose, right? For actually is their position. Every decision to position that element, that component in a certain way has very functional and ideological purposes. Okay, so like which one is the main courtyard, which one is the secondary courtyard? Where the grandparents, if you think about the worship, right, the lineage thingy, where the grandparents' room, where the parents' room, right? So where the uncle rooms, where the children's room, where the daughter-in-law's room, where the servant quarters, where the guest rooms, where the kitchen, where the storeroom, and where is north, right? So consider it based on the concepts that you have understood, right, in the past hour or so. Then you will see them being translated, right, in physical space planning, actually. Yeah, so here you see actually the diagram, social order, family order. So the society which is hierarchical is also reflected in the use of the space within the house itself, right? The squares that are accorded prestige are those for the use of the first ancestors and for worship, right? The order of heaven, and then those for the male head of the family and so on and so forth. This also corresponds to the relationship between public spaces and private spaces within the house, and the access given to those who are close or distant to the family, right? So the inner courtyards, right, are not to be seen by everyone who visit, right? So, okay, yes, you can visit, you'll be entertained in the outer courtyard, right? But you're not given access to the inner courtyard, like by default, right? So likewise, the lower status of the family, probably the youngest daughter, right, would not have a place to sleep close to the the high status space of the patriarch, right? So it's yeah, there's a very strong hierarchy to the family order, right? When it started, it's actually the motive is good lah because they are establishing an order, but I think as time goes by, right, it creates that society which we are used to criticizing, right? This family order that we see in front, you know, that the patriarch of the family, and this also, it is argued that it contributed to the downfall of the Qing dynasty, lah. All right, over subscription to this Confucian, over subscription and over rigidity to the Confucianist order, right? So at the start, it's a good way to organize society, right? But remember that the principle that you push things to the extreme, right, the reverse will start to happen, right? So if you take this order and then you just brainlessly stick to the rigidity of the order and go on for generations, right, eventually the whole order will crumble, right? Okay. Yeah. So this one you can see I won't go and read the fine prints, right? So one, the mayor yard, right? Okay. Okay. This one I think don't pay attention to you can read the words, but don't go and draw the relationship. So the fronting the street, right, will be where if you're looking at the diagram number 4, right, the kitchens and the servants, right, this will be fronting the streets, because that will be noisy and like kind of like the first line of defense, right? So the servants have to observe what is going on in the street. If there's someone sending a message or someone behaving very weirdly, right, naturally they will be alerted. Kitchen also, where all the cooking and the fumes stuff is located right next to the street lah. Then usually they also have things like drainage outside. It's also easy to as an exchange of goods and stuff between the street and the kitchen area, right? And the sanitary area as well. So flanking the outer courtyard, right? We have the guest room on one side, the children's room on the other side. Okay, then separating the inner courtyard and the outer courtyard is the guest hall. All right, and at the two sides are the stores lah, stores and services. So that's where the guest stays. So the hall itself where you entertain the guests, right? So you notice there's a hierarchy, like you come visit, right? Okay, yes, I entertain you in the outer courtyard. You can stay at the next to the outer courtyard, right? Then I'll entertain you at the guest hall maybe. So the guest hall marks that if you imagine like two squares, right, it overlaps at the guest hall, right? So this is like the threshold between the public and the private already. So if you cross the guest hall, right, that's where you enter the inner courtyard, which is one. So on both sides, will be the suites and the house, the spaces for children, right? And at the back of it, the parents' suite, right? So if there are grandparents, then naturally that position of the parent suite, that will be the grandparents' position. So the picture of that entire family itself will be in the deepest space, right? Then they'll always be orientated in the north-south axis, right? Because they are in the northern hemisphere, right? So because this is a manifestation of the order of heaven, so the north-south axis is taken as the organizing element. Okay, so it's basically a built version of ritual. Yeah, the physical manifestation, right? So lower status, higher status, public to private, in terms of hierarchy, so on and so forth. So the feng shui, right, of each place, each space also reflects the person's status in the family. Okay, so why is feng shui relevant when we are talking about Confucianism? Because the I Ching, the I Ching is I think we translated usually to English is a book of divination, and one of the bases for feng shui, right? It's said to be compiled um, by Confucius himself, right? Said to be lah, right? Nobody can really say for sure with authority. So Confucius was also known to love. Okay, sorry. I think this point is a bit contentious, so I haven't. I'll not talk about it because actually the I Ching this is one line of thought lah. The other line of thought is written by. Never mind. Let's not go there. Okay, but the relationship of let's just say that the feng shui, right, coming into the picture because it's based on the I Ching, right? It brings the five elements, right, into daily living, into dwelling, into the concept of dwelling. Okay, I think that's all we need to know, right? We don't want to go too much in depth. So the long north-south axis focuses on the master rooms, reinforcing and symbolizing the entire family that's united under a central power. Okay, and also it gives a certain directionality to it, right? So even if you are within the courtyard itself, you have a very strong sense of north-south, and with that, right, you also have the orientation to the entire city, even when you are within your own dwelling unit. Yeah, so this is a video to watch. We'll skip this. So the depth of the axis is also seen as a manifestation of the symbol of social position and wealth. So the higher the social class, the longer the axis and the greater number of courtyards. Right here, you can see the longest axis in the country for the center of imperial power. Right, so this So you can see the relationship, how deep the inner hall is, right? In contrast with the magnitude and the scale, in contrast with the other sporadic developments, you can't really see here around the city. But if you zoom out and see the city plan, you have a better sense of it. Okay, so this one will be one of the case study examples. So I just briefly touch it. Okay, once again, north-south axis. All right, it has over 980 buildings, over 180 acres, right? But it's all orientated to the north-south axis. Okay, so there's an outer court, there's an inner court, and so on and so forth. So the most important, because of the the scale of the building itself, right? The most important buildings are kind of tucked closer. Of course, the most important progression is like right in the center, right? The central axis. Yeah, and the most important halls are in the middle. So the supporting buildings, right, depending on their importance, they are then attached and placed in relation of their importance to the central axis. That's architectural order, right? So this is the Hall of Supreme Harmony, and in the Chinese Imperial Palace, it's a larger structure and in largest timber structure in China. All right, it sits 330 meters above the surrounding square. All right, so this you can also see that is very obvious the image of authority that it paints, right? So in order to even ascend onto the steps, right, the amount of steps you have to take, yeah, and within the hall itself, you notice there's an elevated platform. Okay, so the Hall of Supreme Harmony, right, is a ceremonial center of imperial power. Okay, so how it translate mathematically is 9 bays wide, right? So 9 bays are 9 you can divide into 3, right? So each bay has 3 bays, 3 smaller bays, right? So 3 is a very interesting number in Chinese architecture because there's a center, there's a left, and there's a right, right? And with that, there is a opportunity to separate importance and hierarchy. Okay, it's 5 bays deep, right? So the numbers symbolizes the majesty of the emperor itself. Okay, so it not only has yellow glazed tiles, but abundance of rich ornaments, right? So the rich ornaments are only allowed to be used in this number, like the ninth and the 10th guardian, right? I think in the case studies, you see the range of guardians that can be used, right? The most important building being the most important building in the country. So the most important guardian figures can be used, right? Because this is the seat of imperial power. So this building utilizes potent numerical and animal beast symbolism. So the use of the number 9, the number 5, in the number of dragon ornaments on the roof ridge, on the throne, on the wall behind the throne, so on and so forth. So details such as the use of dragons, right, can be seen throughout the imperial palace. It represents the power and strength of the emperor and such buildings. The throne itself, you call it the dragon throne, and the emperor's robes, all are contained with decorations with dragons. And the use of the number 9 also symbolizes longevity. Yeah, so one very interesting thing to think about, like why is the dragon the symbol of the emperor? Yeah, I think y'all can think about it. I'm not sure whether you all use AI, whether you will give you a answer to that. Yeah, but that's an interesting thing to think about. And you notice that the Oriental dragon, the Oriental dragon is very different from the Western dragon, right? Which is like just 2 legs, 2 hands, and then we have wings. That's the Western dragon. For Oriental dragon, it's like it's much longer and it's like a sum of parts. Oh, so this one, if you're interested, we will discuss in further at the start of next session. This is just for interest. Okay, so there are other status symbols that included glazed tiles, which serve as a special material for the emperor. So if you look at the photograph itself, right, you notice that the color scheme especially from the sky or from a distance, is very different from the rest. Yeah, so is only the Imperial Palace uses the glazed house, the buildings, especially in the middle, right? And the houses in the Siheyuan, right, surrounding the palace itself, they only use grey tiles in the courtyards. Yeah, so there's a very big contrast in the color and the materials used. Oh, and the royal courtyard's doors they're red, whereas the common people's doors are black. Okay, so it symbolizes power and defense. By the location of stone lions also in front of each courtyard gate, and they differ in sizes to correspond to the class of the dwellings. Right, so the higher the class, the bigger and more frightening the stone lions at the front gate were. Right, thus each family's class can be identified from the gates of its courtyard. The parents even sought marriage partners for their children on the basis of courtyard gates indicating a class that is similar to or higher than their own. Right, so it's that intricate human politics manifested in physical form, right? Just that the type of lions that you choose, right, for to guard your front door makes a difference, to marriage. Okay, so this is a typical courtyard house. Hierarchy in terms of privacy, in terms of importance, public to private, right? So on and so forth. Okay, the details, I'll leave it to the case studies. Okay, so the dwelling uses the principles of I Ching to design the house, right? It's connected to the desire to maintain and ensure that the order of heaven is preserved via appropriate rites or rituals. Okay, so feng shui, right, is literally it means wind and water, right? It maintains relationship between heaven and earth, people and ancestors, space and time, right? So it's not feng shui is not okay, it's a technique that was used back then, right? For many users, to design a place of dwelling, right? So it's very comprehensive and very deep knowledge, right? Depending on the level you go to, right? So it's not nowadays when you look at it, maybe you think it's like kind of superstitious or old school, right? But there are mm, mm, very practical applications, right? That it's also relatable to the principles that we observe in architecture. Yeah, so it's actually a very practical application. Then there is also a metaphysical aspect of it, right? Which is limited, which is not limited. It's associated with the individual or the every individual that's staying in the house, right? Most importantly is the patriarch of the family, lah, of course. Oh, so that one we won't go into detail, but interesting if you want to study in depth. Okay, so the courtyard house is seen as a miniature heaven, right? The order of heaven on earth. It uses the cosmology of the square and the dome, right? Because the dome, right, being a half sphere, right? It's like it symbolizes the dome of heaven that's left unbuilt, right? So there's a correspondence and reflectance between heaven and earth, right? So they are, if you design it, if you lay it out in that right manner, right? Uh, Heaven and earth are resonating and they're speaking to each other. Okay, so the open courtyard reminds all that the rule of heaven could be redrawn. All right, so it is a grace from heaven, right? So if we do not observe the principle of humanity, if we don't observe the order of heaven, right? Um, these favors can actually be um, they can disappear, right? So it's not assumed that they will be there. Okay, it's a reminder that the grace of heaven can be redrawn if the circumstances or if humanity have lost its way and they are behaving in a not so harmonious way, a not so correct way. Yeah. So feng shui is used in the ordering of all aspects of life, right? It's also used to reinforce social and family hierarchy. And the best sides, right, in terms of feng shui are enfolded by mother, right? The earth is fertilized by the father, which is the water in terms of rain, in terms of moisture in the air that is moved by the wind, right? So it allows the accumulation of qi that meanders and circulates around the site, right? So in every site, if the qi is like stagnant, or if there's an absence of qi, right? Naturally, that site itself, right, is not a good place for dwelling, right? So if you analyze it in the current architectural tools we have, right, it still makes sense, right? And then you can draw a relationship between the practice and feng shui and the practice of architecture in our time, right? But of course, architecture doesn't cover the metaphysical bits, right, which feng shui also covers. So the site faces south, and the mountains symbolizes ancestry. Okay, so they're very picky about the ancestral sites because they believe, remember, they worship their lineage, right, all the way to the ancestors. So if you house the ancestors' tombs in a place where good feng shui, right, it is believed that the benefits the future generations will reap the benefits because it's a lineage. Yeah, so being the most important place, the most important building, right? Of course, the Imperial Palace has excellent feng shui, right? So it's in the absence of a physical hill, a natural hill at the back, right? Because because it has to be situated within a city, right? And the city doesn't have the city is relatively flat, lah. So they actually constructed a man-made hill at the back, right? And then they built a stream at the front that is enhanced by a man-made moat flowing past the front gate, right? So the complex it faces south, orientated on north-south axis. So all the rules are observed in feng shui are observed, and in the absence of certain elements, right, they are artificially created. Okay, so the ideal feng shui spaces balances the yin and the yang. So yin is symbolized by the mountains, the solid, the buildings, where yang is associated with water, void, and road. Right. So if there are no natural mountains and rivers, they can be created, right? So the courtyard house itself, right, is seen as an ideal landform. Actually, is small but ideal, right? Where everything is space placed according to the principles of feng shui, right? And then that's why I think if you consult feng shui masters, right, they might think that, oh, because it's lacking in this and that, maybe you'll place a water fountain here, maybe you'll put a plant there, to achieve a balance, right? So if there is absence of natural elements, of course, natural elements are the most ideal, but if there's absence, they can be man-made, right? So major rooms facing south in a U shape with two wings forming the tiger and the dragon hills, right? And the opposite screen wall is facing mountain, and the courtyard faces to the sky, right? So it resonates with the sky, and it offers an opening for the sky to enter, right? If you try to retrace to what we were talking about last week, by creating the intended emptiness, right, that is allowing the cosmic energies to enter the space. Okay, so usually the center is off center, and there's a zigzag path to encourage good qi to enter and to prevent bad qi, right? So the zigzag path also symbolizes the meandering river, which is ideal like at the front of the house, right? So the ideal position is, imagine you're sitting now, wherever you're sitting, right, you have the mountains to your back, and then you have a body of water to the front, right? So it's also very practical because if you look for this kind of sites, right, basically most of them are very good for agriculture. Yeah, so back then society is an agricultural society. Um, these are very important because if you cite a place for your dwelling, right, then crops cannot grow, then you will you will die of hunger. Yeah, so it needs to be a place where um, there's access to fertile land, right? So by taking the mountains and the water as reference, right, actually you're kind of safeguarded by a lot of uncertainties. Yeah, so because back then is you really have to grow your crops, farm it, and share it amongst the community. It's not like today's context, you go to the supermarket and you want to eat like salmon, right? And then you fly it in from Norway. Yeah, or you want to eat something that comes from North America, right? Then they fly it in. It doesn't happen that way, right? So it's also arguable if you think in terms of sustainability. whether that way of eating is sustainable, or living next to a farm and eating whatever comes from the farm, yeah, which is more sustainable, right? So because it's I think it's needed because of the context that the issues that we are facing, climate change, environmental issues, right? We consider what exactly are we doing wrong? What exactly have we done wrong? Right? So what exactly are we doing wrong? And because if we are doing wrong, we jolly well cut down on that. You know, we can say that, oh, solar panels, zero waste, carbon neutral, right? But these are moving forward. But if the day-to-day life, right, we are still desiring something that comes from, if you're gonna ship a frozen salmon all the way from Norway, right, the energy and the carbon that's involved, right, it's actually considerable, you know. Yeah, as cities become rich, right, then the desires become more and more, uh I don't know the word to use lah, but you know, you can eat from all over the world. So these are the small things that contribute to the carbon footprint, right? Yeah, so it digress a bit. Yeah, because we are talking about nature and balance. Okay, so there is um the diagrams of the I Ching, right? You see the similarities to what we have discussed in the lectures prior. Reference to four cardinal directions, right? The balance of the yin and the yang is represented in terms of the odd and even numbers, right? The theory of the five elements, 金木水火土, right? There's gold, metal, timber, water, fire, and the earth, right? And actually within each element, right, there are two of them. There are two types of element. One is older, because if you overlap if you superimpose the concept of yin and yang, right, on the five elements, you notice that each element actually there are two types. Yeah. What it means is that, for example, okay, we use example of soil. Oh, so soil is one of the elements, right? So actually, if you take yin yang and you put it on soil, you notice that actually soil, there's not just one type. There are two types of soil, right? If you think about the soil that you see when you go trekking, right? You go into the mountains. Yeah, you go to the mountains. You notice the soil is one kind of soil. It's pretty hard and dry and hardy, right? Right. So what is on the other spectrum? Soil that's very soft, right? Kind of moist. Right. So it doesn't mean that one is better than the other, right? There are pros and cons. For example, if you go to the yang soil, right? The yang soil versus the yin soil. So the yang soil is kind of good for building things. Like if you want to build a house, right, it means that your foundation need not be too deep, right? As compared to, say, you are building a house on the yin soil, which is a softer soil, then your foundation, you probably have to dig much deeper, right? For example, if you are, let's say in Singapore, if you are building a house, right, near Marine Parade, East Coast area, right, as compared to, say, you are building a house near Bukit Batok area, the foundation requirements are very different because of the nature of the soil. Okay, so this example of the eating or feng shui being applicable in our context, right? So in terms of characteristics, right, back to the example of the yang soil and the yin soil, you notice that, okay, so if you are talking about building, so there's a pros and cons for the type of soil, right? Then if you think in terms of agriculture, you notice that the yang soil, right, it's very hard to plant things and nurture things, because it's so hard, right? And even if you're going to cultivate it, right, it takes a long time before it becomes suitable for agriculture. Whereas if you think of the yin soil, right, it's actually very good for agriculture and farming because it's very nurturing. Like whatever you plant, right, most of them will grow, right? So it depends. In feng shui, right, in balance, right, in the I Ching, right, it's always things are always in a flux. So there is no fixed good and bad, right? It depends on what you are. It depends on your intent, your purpose, right? Then based on the characteristics of the site, right? Then you see how to bring it to the best balance, so that whatever you want to do, right, you can do it in the easiest way. Actually, that's yeah. So I digress a bit to illustrate the use of this kind of diagrams. So the symbolic use of the numbers 5, 8, and 9, right? And diagrams are used to access meditate qi of a side of the house. Okay, so above you see the bakwa on the left and the 9-chamber diagram on the right. So depending on both of them are used for feng shui reasons. Oh, but we won't go into details. Yeah, so these are examples. I don't think we are doing them for case studies, but some examples of the Chinese courtyard house in Singapore's context, right? So in Singapore's context, right, the courtyard houses are kind of built by the wealthy Chinese merchants, right? Because if you rewind, let's say rewind 100 years, right, those that those are not so wealthy, they will, they'll stay in maybe the kampong houses, the attap houses. They stay, maybe if they need to work in the pier, right, they'll stay in the shop houses, right? So it's only the wealthy, the people who are really wealthy has the resources to recreate the courtyard house. Yeah. So it's a bit different now. So for Beijing, Beijing is kind of organic. Like everybody's staying there because of the horizontal spread of the land. But in land scarce Singapore, right, and because of the nature of the migrant society, courtyard houses mostly built by the wealthy Chinese merchants, right, and they stay inside. Right, so back then there was like the 4 grand mansions built by the Teochew Tauges, who are businessmen, right? So most of them started as private residents, right? And so similar principles lah. The north-south axis, the position of the rooms, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we won't go into details. Okay, so to conclude, Confucianist ideas, right, functions as a mode of ordering society and maintaining the order of heaven. Okay, so the Chinese courtyard house, right, also reflects the social order which created it, right, and the order is trying to recreate. The Confucian hierarchical pyramid of family and city governance was reinforced and maintained by the design of the house. The design of the house, in turn, reinforced and maintained the greater order of heaven. The greater order of heaven, in turn, via feng shui, helped to ensure the health, prosperity, and peace of the occupants of the house and greater city society. So these systems of feng shui and Confucianism may be seen as a single system for ordering and maintain order in a society, right? So they can be seen wherever the Chinese settle, right? Because they are a large part of it, right? Because they are parts of China bounded by the sea, right? So they can be a seafaring society. So they bring this philosophy, this concept of order with them, right? Even though they migrate. So that's why you can see, right, parallels of this kind of Confucianist principle as far as Singapore, right? Malaysia, even Japan, Korea, right? You will see certain similarities because they all were built by the migrant Chinese. Okay, so whenever the Chinese settled, Confucian thought and feng shui have structured both ways of life and society in one way or another. Okay, so I think with that, I'll conclude the sharing for today. Okay, I'm going to stop share and stop the recording. Any questions?